The first light of San Francisco sliced across the glass towers like a sharpened blade. And in that very moment, David Coleman, a man once dismissed by the world, was preparing for the day that would change the entire aviation industry. The Swiss watch on his wrist vibrated softly. 6 o'clock sharp. In his penthouse overlooking the bay, David stood motionless before the window, his reflection merging with the golden dawn spreading over the city. 15 years ago, he had been just a young man from Harlem, working 2 shifts a day to afford college. Today, at 46, he was the CEO of Coleman Equity Group, a multi-billion-dollar investment conglomerate, and only a few hours away from the biggest deal of his life. On the table, his espresso still steamed. His phone lit up with a message from Jessica Moore, his executive assistant of 8 years. "Everything's ready, sir. The Horizon Vista board has confirmed the signing in Chicago. The legal team is waiting for your signal." David took a slow sip of coffee, his eyes reflecting the glittering skyline beyond the glass. Horizon Vista Airlines. Soon that name would belong to him. A once prestigious airline, now plagued by scandals collapsing under weak leadership and a toxic culture. But to David, it wasn't just a business transaction. It was a chance to rebuild, to prove that a company could turn the profit and still heal what was broken. The smart home system chimed softly. "Your car will arrive in 7 minutes. Flight departs at 10:05 from San Francisco International to Chicago O'Hare." David set the cup down and inhaled deeply. The scent of sea salt mingled with the oak floors beneath him. Everything was perfect, except for the one memory that still clung to him, the voice of his late father. "You know, David, men like us have to be twice as good just to get halfway there." The image of the old barbershop returned to him, his father's calloused hands, the worn collared shirt he always wore, that gentle smile and eyes that never strayed from their dreams. "Excellence," his father used to say, "is the only language they'll ever have to respect." David nodded slightly, as if making a silent promise to the man who raised him. He slipped on a charcoal grey suit, a navy tie, and looked at himself in the mirror. The man staring back had the eyes of someone who'd fallen and risen more times than anyone should. Behind the calm confidence lay a quiet exhaustion, the fatigue of a man who had spent his whole life proving his worth. The black Tesla rolled up to the lobby. The driver opened the door and bowed slightly. "Good morning, Mr. Coleman." David smiled politely. "To the airport." The morning city drifted past his window bridges, arching like silver threads through the mist-glass towers flashing in the sunlight, and far off the bay shimmering like a giant mirror. He opened his tablet and tapped on a file titled Project Horizon. Rows of numbers filled the screen losses of 2.4 billion customer satisfaction at 46% over 20 lawsuits alleging racial and gender discrimination. A dying airline, the world called it. But David saw something else, a legacy waiting to be redeemed and cleansed. The car glided smoothly down Highway 101. In the silence of the cabin, the only sound was his fingers tapping lightly as he typed a few notes. Horizon Vista equals symbol. Don't just save the brand, save the culture. People overprocess. Another message came in from Jessica. "The media is speculating about the acquisition. Do you want me to deny it?" "No," he replied. "Let them wonder. We'll give them a story worth more than numbers." The motorcade turned into the private entrance of the Terminal 2 business wing at San Francisco International. As he stepped out, sunlight bounced off the reflective glass doors. David straightened his tie. Each step toward the terminal echoed like the steady drumbeat of fate counting down. Security staff recognized him, bowing respectfully, but David only offered a polite nod. He hated the hierarchy of deference to power and indifference to ordinary people. That very mindset, the instinct to rank human worth, was what he would soon confront in ways no one could foresee. At the VIP counter, a young receptionist with a perfect smile greeted him. "Mr. Coleman, your private lounge is ready." He nodded, placed his briefcase beside him, and glanced around. The lounge was filled with executives, wealthy travelers, and busy eyes glued to screens, coffee cups, and the subtle competitions of status. He recalled Jessica's question from yesterday's meeting. "Are you sure you want to fly on Horizon Vista yourself? That airline's being dragged across social media for mistreating passengers." He had laughed. "That's exactly why I need to go. Before I own a company, I need to see it with my own eyes, not through reports or flattery." It seemed like a simple decision, just a way to test the experience firsthand. But neither he nor anyone else could have guessed that this flight would ignite the greatest transformation in the history of American aviation. David sat down, his gaze drifting beyond the glass wall toward the runway. A Horizon Vista jet stood still under the rising sun, its silver body glinting like a giant bird waiting to take flight. He wondered to himself, do I really understand the people who work inside that plane, or have I only seen them through spreadsheets? Something shifted quietly inside him, not pride but intuition, a feeling that this morning would not end like any other. A new message appeared on his screen. "Mr. Coleman, Flight 1005 is now open for check-in. First class, counter number 14. He drew a deep breath, buttoned his jacket, and lifted his briefcase. The glass doors opened automatically. The wind carried the faint scent of jet fuel and the distant echo of boarding calls. David Coleman walked toward the first-class counter, unaware that within minutes, this very place would test his dignity, his resolve, and the ideals he had spent a lifetime building. And from that moment on, a revolution would begin, a movement the world would soon know as justice in the skies. The clock in the airport terminal showed 8:47 in the morning as David Coleman approached the first-class counter of Horizon Vista Airlines. The white lights reflected off the marble floor, casting a long, steady shadow behind him. The sounds of rolling suitcases and overlapping boarding calls filled the air like the pulse of a restless world. Yet beneath all that movement, something awaited him, a cut so invisible yet sharper than any insult. The woman behind the counter looked up as David approached. Her name tag read, Karen Blake, Senior First Class Agent. Her blonde hair was tightly pinned, her smile mechanical, cold enough to feel rehearsed. "Good morning, I'm on the 10:05 flight to Chicago," David said, holding up his phone with the QR code. His voice was deep and composed, the tone of a man accustomed to making decisions. Karen glanced at the screen, then looked up at him. That single second of eye contact was all it took for David to see it, a flicker of doubt, quick and small, but real. "Mr. Coleman, let me double-check your booking," she said, fingers tapping rapidly on the keyboard. The blue glow from the screen lit her face, each tense expression betraying her confusion at what she saw. A black man wearing an Italian suit, holding a first-class ticket. It didn't fit her logic. "I'm sorry, but there seems to be something unusual about this reservation," Karen said, emphasizing the word unusual. David frowned slightly, though his smile didn't fade. "The ticket was purchased directly by my company, paid for, with the Coleman Equity Group corporate card." "Yes, I understand," Karen replied, her tone dropping into one of polite suspicion. Would you mind showing me the credit card and another form of identification? David calmly took out his wallet and handed over a platinum business card. I believe the standard policy requires only a passport. Normally, yes, Karen said, eyes still fixed on the screen, but in this case, it's just an extra verification. In this case, David asked, his voice soft but firm enough to make her uneasy. Karen glanced around, then lowered her tone, as if afraid to be overheard. Sometimes the system flags errors from newer companies or tickets purchased with reward points. David said nothing. He'd grown far too familiar with how prejudice hides behind words like procedure system and technical issue. Words that sounded harmless, yet were crafted to demean and exclude. "Let me call the supervisor," she said, signaling to a middle-aged man wearing a badge that read, "Tom Wheeler, Customer Service Supervisor." Tom approached with the confidence of someone convinced he's always right. "What's the issue?" "Karen, a small problem with this gentleman's first-class ticket," she said, quietly glancing toward David. Tom nodded and turned to him with a forced smile. "Good morning, sir. We just need a few minutes to verify something. Could I see another form of ID?" David handed over his driver's license. "I'm confident my ticket is perfectly valid. Of course, it's probably just a verification thing. Our first-class screening process is very strict," Tom said, though his eyes carried the same unspoken judgment. Beside them, two white passengers were being checked in with ease, smiling as their tickets were scanned within seconds, and they were escorted to the VIP lounge. David watched the scene quietly, then turned back to Tom. A strict process for whom exactly? Tom hesitated. "I'm just following policy, Mr. Coleman. Which policy requires that someone like me be checked more thoroughly? Please don't misunderstand." Tom said quickly, "We're simply ensuring safety for all our passengers." Another voice interrupted. "Is there a problem here?" The newcomer wore a dark blue uniform, his badge reading Mark Ellis Air Marshal. He stood straight-hand, resting near his belt eyes, assessing David like a potential threat. The air around the counter grew heavy. Nearby passengers began to take notice, some discreetly lifting their phones to record. A cold tension crawled down David's spine. Not fear, but a mix of humiliation and fury. "There's no problem," David said, his tone calm but edged with steel. "Just a first-class ticket that deserves to be treated like every other one." Tom pressed his lips together. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Coleman, but first class is now fully booked. We can only offer you a seat in economy, plus, and of course, we'll refund the difference." Silence hung in the air. Karen kept her eyes down, pretending to type. David exhaled slowly. "My ticket was confirmed yesterday." "How could it be full?" Tom shrugged. "It's a rare situation, but it happens. We appreciate your understanding." The final words struck like a silent slap. David looked down at the freshly printed ticket, Economy Plus seat, 23B. In that instant, he could have reacted, demanded a manager, even called the media. But he didn't. He simply said, "I hope the refund is processed quickly." "Of course," Tom replied, visibly relieved. "Have a pleasant flight." David took the ticket and turned away. Each step echoed across the marble floor, heavy and deliberate. Behind him, he caught Karen whispering to a co-worker. He probably used reward points. They often do. He paused for half a second, didn't turn back, didn't speak, but his fists tightened. Throughout his years conquering the corporate world, David had grown used to skeptical glances, backhanded compliments and meetings where he was interrupted, despite being the smartest man in the room. But something about this morning felt different. Maybe because today he knew he owned the very airline they worked for. He smiled, coldly, dangerously. Perfect, he thought. You've just written your own termination letters. As he passed through security, the scanner light washed over his calm, unreadable face. But behind his eyes, something was forming a plan. Walking down the jet bridge toward the plane, David glanced through the window. Another Horizon Vista jet was taxiing down the runway, the company logo gleaming in the sunlight. He recalled his father's voice from that old Harlem barber shop. If they don't give you a seat at the table, son, buy the whole chair and let everyone sit. David smiled. He had done just that, though no one knew it yet. As the flight attendant at the cabin door greeted him with a cheerful, "Welcome aboard, Mr. Coleman," he returned the smile politely, but thought to himself, "No Horizon Vista. You're the ones being welcomed to your judgment day." The airplane door closed, sealing off the outside world, and within that narrow cabin, the story of humiliation, justice, and an unshakable reckoning quietly began, silent but unstoppable. The economy cabin felt heavy and cramped like a sealed metal box. David Coleman sat in the middle seat of row 23, his broad shoulders pinned between a man furiously typing on a laptop and an elderly woman dozing against the window. The seat wouldn't recline, the tray table was chipped, and the murmuring from the rows ahead sliced through his patience like scissors, snipping one thread at a time. In front of him, his ticket read, "Economy Plus, Seat 23B." The white letters on a cold blue background looked like a bitter reminder that even when you have money, they can still make you feel small. The plane trembled slightly as it left the ground. David fastened his seatbelt and looked out the window. San Francisco shrank below him, its streets winding like the veins of a tired body. He thought to himself, it all begins here, from a check-in counter, from a single look, from a single prejudice. He took a deep breath, forcing down the anger rising inside. Then came the echo of his father's voice. "Don't let anger drive you, son. Let it guide you." A soft voice pulled him back to the present. "Excuse me, sir. Would you like help lifting your bag into the overhead bin?" David looked up. The flight attendant, a black woman with the name tag Lauren Brooks, offered a genuine smile, the first sincere smile he'd seen all morning. "Thank you. I can manage," David replied gently. But Lauren still adjusted his luggage, then leaned in close, her voice low enough for only him to hear. "I saw what happened at the check-in counter," she whispered. "I'm sorry for how they treated you." David froze for a moment. No one, absolutely, no one that morning had said those words to him. Lauren continued, her tone quiet but steady. "They call it a security procedure, but we know what it really is, another kind of color check." A wave of emotion rose in David's chest as he looked into her eyes, strong but weary. She spoke quickly before the supervisor walked by. "I've worked for Horizon Vista for 5 years. I've seen this happen too many times. They train us to evaluate passenger risk. But we all know what that means. If you speak out, they cut your hours, give you bad evaluations, and eventually transfer you away." David nodded slightly. "Thank you, Lauren. Thank you for your honesty." She smiled faintly. "I'm honest because I'm tired of silence." When she walked away, the man beside David, a middle-aged Asian man in a slightly wrinkled suit, spoke up. "I saw what happened at the gate. They treated you like a suspect." David turned as the man extended his hand. "Eric Nguyen, civil rights attorney. I work for the Midwest Justice Protection Organization." "David Coleman," he replied, shaking his hand. Eric paused, studying him more closely. "Wait, Coleman Equity Group." I read the article about you in Forbes. You're the one about to acquire Horizon Vista, aren't you? David raised an eyebrow, a faint smile forming. You've got a sharp eye. Eric leaned in, lowering his voice. If that's true, then you just witnessed living proof of what I've been investigating for 3 years. David's expression hardened. Go on. Eric opened his laptop, the screen lighting up with charts and documents. Horizon Vista currently has over 27 active discrimination complaints, but they keep settling quietly or blaming it on procedure. I've always believed that if someone with real power and credibility ever became the complainant, this whole system would collapse. David sat in silence. He could feel it now. He was sitting on a powder keg, and he was the detonator. What are your chances of winning such a case? David asked. Eric gave a thin smile. If it's just about the law, 50-50. But if you're involved, the man who was just humiliated like that, and also happens to own the company, then the law won't be the limit anymore. David rested his chin on his hand, thinking deeply. For a moment, his anger was gone, replaced by the calm stillness of a mound right before the storm. The plane leveled off at 33,000 feet. The hum of engines merged with the sound of keyboards clicking. David opened his tablet and logged into the company's internal network. With his shareholder-level access, he entered Horizon Vista's internal systems, employee evaluations, customer complaints, and confidential reports. Within minutes, hundreds of files appeared, accounts of racial bias, service refusals for black passengers, unfair hiring scores. Every line on the screen was a blade cutting into his faith. A memory surfaced his father 30 years ago, standing in a small Harlem bank, denied a loan despite perfect paperwork. The old man had walked out empty-handed, muttering the one line David would never forget. If they don't let you play on their field, son buy the whole field. Now he had done exactly that, and today it was time to clean that field. David typed an encrypted message to Jessica Activate Protocol Omega. Urgent board and legal meeting. Prepare full authority transfer. The reply came instantly, received. The team is standing by. Lauren returned, handing him a glass of water. I thought you might need this, she said softly. David looked up at her, his tone gentle. If this airline ever truly changes, would you want to stay? She looked surprised. If they really change, I would stay. But I don't believe they will. David nodded. Then keep that belief just a little longer. She gave a puzzled nod, not understanding his meaning. Eric glanced over, whispering, What are you planning? David's lips curved into a faint smile. Call it. Making things right at 33,000 feet. The plane shook slightly in turbulence. The announcement came through the speakers. We're now flying over the state of Nevada. Around them, passengers drifted into sleep. Only David remained awake, his screen glowing in the dim cabin light, cold, bright, and full of calculation. His phone buzzed. A message from Jessica, all merger documents can be completed today. We just need your final approval. David replied briefly. Wait until I land. He leaned back and closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids, he saw images of his father, of black men and women, forced to bow their heads at service counters, lined up and categorized, simply because they didn't look first class. And beneath the steady hum of the engines, he heard his father's voice again, not as advice, but as a command. Don't just fly, change the sky. The plane shuddered softly through the clouds. Sunlight burst through sharp as a blade. David opened his eyes and smiled, faintly cold, calm, resolute. This flight was no longer a trip to Chicago. It was a flight toward justice. And as Horizon Vista Flight 457 carved its path through the American sky, David Coleman had already prepared every move that would make an entire industry bow its head, a reversal of power 33,000 feet above the ground. The soft beeping sound, announcing preparation for landing, cut through the cabin and broke David's train of thought. The captain's voice came over the speakers, steady and professional, but inside him everything was churning. No one on that flight knew that once the wheels touched the ground, the man sitting in seat 23B would become the new owner of the very airline they were flying on. He looked out the window. Chicago was unfolding beneath him, buildings lined up like chess pieces, sunlight cutting through a thin layer of clouds and scattering across the shimmering surface of Lake Michigan. Yet in that beautiful light, all David could see was a bitter contrast, the glow of a great city that could not hide the shadows of prejudice. When the plane landed on the runway, a few passengers clapped politely. Seatbelts clicked open. People stood pulled down their suitcases and began talking in low, excited tones. David alone remained seated, his gaze calm, his hands clasped together on his lap. "You are not getting off." Eric Nguyen turned back and asked, his hand already wrapped around his laptop. David smiled, his eyes seeming to look straight through everything. "I will get off later, Eric. There is still a lot of work to do." Eric nodded, but before he stepped out into the aisle, he pulled a business card from his jacket pocket. "If you need me, know. If your airline needs me, I am ready to help." David accepted it and slipped it gently into his breast pocket. "I will call, and when I do that is when we begin." When Eric left, David unlocked his phone. A notification from Jessica Moore flashed on the screen. Completed. 2:17 in the afternoon, Coleman Equity Group now controls 78% of Horizon Vista Airlines shares. You are the new executive chairman. A slow smile appeared on his lips. It was calm, neither triumphant nor vengeful, more like the feeling of finally returning to where he was meant to be. The last passengers left the plane, leaving only a few cleaning staff. As David rose from his seat, his eyes met those of Karen Blake, the woman from the check-in counter that morning. She froze, her polite smile dissolving. Tom Wheeler, the supervisor, stood nearby, his face pale. They knew. The video from JFK had gone viral, and now the name David Coleman was all over the financial news, the black billionaire who took over Horizon Vista Airlines. David walked towards them. "Nice to see you again," he said. His tone was polite, and even yet every word landed with the weight of stone. Tom tried to force a smile. "Mr. Coleman, we are truly sorry about what happened this morning." David met his eyes. "I am not looking for an apology. I am looking for accountability." The cabin fell completely silent. He continued, "I want to see the regional director right now." Karen's voice trembled. "Sir, you can go to the VIP lounge. We will—" "No, David," cut in. "I want to meet here on this plane where it all started." In less than 10 minutes, a middle-aged woman in a black suit hurried up the jet bridge and stepped into the cabin, Linda Carver, Chicago Hub Operations Director. Her face was tense, but she still tried to hold on to her professional composure. "Mr. Coleman, I am Linda Carver. I have been informed of the incident. I sincerely apologize and want to assure you that David raised a hand to stop her. You do not need to apologize, you just need to listen." He pulled out his phone, opened an email, and held it out for her to see. On the screen, a single line glowed. Coleman Equity Group has officially completed the acquisition of Horizon Vista Airlines, effective 2:17 in the afternoon, Central Standard Time. Linda read it, her eyes widening. "Are you saying that you am the new owner?" David answered, his voice low and sharp like a blade. "I am no longer the downgraded passenger. I am the one who decides who will keep flying with us and who will be leaving the cockpit." Karen stepped back. Tom swallowed hard. No one dared to speak. Linda took a deep breath, fighting to remain composed. "Mr. Coleman, in that case, I would like to arrange an emergency meeting with the leadership team." "Already arranged," he interrupted. "At the Marriott O'Hare Hotel in 30 minutes. And you, along with these 2 employees, will be coming with me." A black SUV waited for them on the tarmac. No one spoke during the 20-minute drive. The steady roll of the tires on the asphalt sounded like a countdown to judgment. At the hotel, the 20th floor had been turned into an emergency war room. At the head of the long table, screens showed the faces of Horizon Vista's board and executives calling in from Dallas and New York. Jessica Moore stood beside the screen documents in hand, her eyes steady, as if she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. When David entered the room, fell silent. There was no need for an introduction. The news had already reached Wall Street an hour earlier. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice deep but clear. "My name is David Coleman, CEO of Coleman Equity Group, and as of today, Executive Chairman of Horizon Vista Airlines." Some people whispered under their breath, others bowed their heads. David went on his hand, resting on the polished wooden table. "This morning, I arrived at the airport as a passenger, wanting to understand the service culture of the airline I was about to acquire. I do not need to say much, because the entire country has seen the video. A passenger, humiliated, treated with suspicion, downgraded all because of his skin color." He paused. The air grew heavier like lead. "The worst part is not that it happened, but that it is no surprise. Because this is not the first time. This is a culture that has seeped into the DNA of this company, a culture that treats prejudice as procedure, contempt as customer service." Linda lowered her head. Tom and Karen sat at the back, fingers tightly intertwined, beads of sweat forming on their brows. David opened a folder. 3 years of complaint data. Nearly 30 lawsuits. Hundreds of employees reporting discrimination. "And what did you do?" His eyes swept the room. "You settled quietly. You covered it up. You called it a misunderstanding." A voice protested from one of the screens, Charles Whitman, the former CEO, speaking from Dallas. "Mr. Coleman, I understand that you are upset, but you cannot just..." David cut him off, his voice frozen with ice. "I am not upset, Mr. Whitman. I am taking action. And the first action is this. You are terminated effective immediately, along with 8 other executives responsible for allowing this culture of discrimination to exist." The room erupted in low gasps and murmurs. Whitman snapped, "You cannot do that." "I can," David replied simply. "Because I am the owner, and because ethics are not up for negotiation." He turned to Linda. "Ms. Carver, from this moment, you will temporarily oversee operations for the Chicago hub until we complete a full review of the management structure. These 2, he said, looking at Tom and Karen, are suspended immediately pending investigation." Karen's voice shook as she tried to speak. "Mr. Coleman, I did not intend to discriminate, I just..." David looked at her, his gaze not angry, only deeply tired. "I believe you did not intend it. But it is exactly that lack of awareness that makes everything so damaging." He rose to his feet, his voice filling the room. "From today on, Horizon Vista will be rebuilt from the ground up. It will no longer be an airline of privilege. It will be an airline of dignity." Jessica nodded, and handed him a thick stack of documents. "We will call this reform program The Flight to Justice, Our Journey Toward Justice." David looked around the table. Every face reflected something different: fear, anger, confusion, and, in a few, something like hope. He knew he had just dropped a bomb into the center of the old power structure, but he also knew that only by breaking it apart could they ever rebuild it the right way. When the meeting ended, David stepped out into the corridor and gazed through the large window. Outside, planes bearing the Horizon Vista logo lined up along the runways, glinting in the fading light of sunset. He thought to himself, "We will take off again. But this time, no one gets left behind." And as night fell over Chicago, in a single hotel room at the Marriott, a corporate revolution had officially begun. The Chicago wind howled against the tall glass windows of the Marriott O'Hare Hotel. Inside, the executive floor, usually reserved for million-dollar negotiations, had been transformed into David Coleman's emergency command center. On the long walnut conference table, stacks of internal documents were neatly arranged, broken only by the pale blue glow of open laptops. The air felt thick, like someone had just crushed a burning cigarette out with their bare hand. David stood by the window, looking out at the Horizon Vista planes, lying motionless on the tarmac. The lights from their tails washed over his face, highlighting the dark circles under his eyes and the tight line of his mouth. In his mind, every detail from that morning, Karen's mocking smile, Tom's suspicious stare, Linda's empty apology, still echoed one by one. But now none of it was about emotion anymore. Now it was about action. Jessica Moore walked in her arms, wrapped around a stack of files so thick it was hard to close. Personnel reports, complaints, internal evaluations, and customer feedback from the past 3 years. I filtered out duplicates. Marcus Ruiz is reviewing the financial side. David gave a slight nod. "Good. Bring everyone in. We start in 30 minutes. As Jessica left, Lauren Brooks, the black flight attendant who had dared to speak up, stepped into the room. She was no longer in uniform, but in a simple shirt. She still looked a little self-conscious, but there was a new steadiness in her eyes. "Mr. Coleman," she said, "I still do not quite believe things can really change, but I want to help." David looked at her and nodded slowly. "Lauren, people like you are the reason I am doing this. Not for revenge, but so people like you never have to bow your head again." He gestured for her to sit. "Tell me everything, starting with what you have seen." Lauren began to speak. Her voice shook at first, then gradually grew stronger. She talked about training sessions where management stressed protecting the image of the first-class cabin. She talked about passengers being downgraded because they didn't look like premium clients. She talked about colleagues who were fired simply for pushing back. Every sentence was a cut across the wall of silence Horizon Vista had built over the years. When she finished, David said nothing. He did not take notes, did not interrupt. He simply listened. And when Lauren looked up at him, his eyes spoke what he did not say. "Out loud, I believe you." The door opened again. Marcus Ruiz, Human Resources Director at Coleman Equity Group, walked in, followed by Eric Nguyen, the civil rights attorney from the flight. They shook hands quickly and jumped straight into work. Marcus spoke in a low voice. "We can begin an internal investigation tonight. I have already arranged private interview rooms with cameras, transcripts, everything fully compliant." Eric added, "I will oversee the legal framework. We need rock-solid evidence to avoid any countersuits for unfair dismissal." David allowed himself a faint smile. "You are working like you have been rehearsing for this night your whole life." Marcus replied, not rehearsing, just waiting for the right person to give the order. 9 o'clock in the evening. The purge began. The first person called in was Karen Blake. She walked in with her hands clasped together, trying to appear calm. In front of her sat David, Marcus, and Eric. The camera was already recording. David spoke, his tone gentle but heavy as lead. Ms. Blake, this interview is to clarify your actions at the check-in counter this morning and the procedures involved. Do you consent to being recorded? Karen nodded. Yes. Marcus started with the easy questions, asking about her work history and standard passenger verification procedures. She answered in rehearsed phrases, following protocol, adhering to guidelines, never intended any discrimination. But when David asked, then why was I the only black passenger in that line, the only one asked for additional verification? Karen fell silent. Her eyes flickered. Her voice dropped to almost a murmur. We were instructed to assess brand image risk. No one spelled it out, but everyone knew what that meant. Eric raised an eyebrow. Image risk. As in anyone who looks different from the usual first-class clientele. She bowed her head. Yes. David leaned back in his chair, his voice lower. I do not need you to feel ashamed. I need the truth. Who gave you that rule? Supervisor Tom Wheeler. But he was just following orders from above. Above who Karen let out a long breath. Operations in Dallas. The interview ended. As she walked out, David spoke quietly. Not quite to her. You are not a monster. But your silence allowed the monsters to thrive. Next came Tom Wheeler. He walked in, trying to hold himself like a man still in control. But when pressed about brand image risk, his composure slipped. That was guidance from Dallas. I just followed instructions, he said. And if those instructions are discriminatory, Eric pressed. Tom forced a strained chuckle. I am just the middleman. I did not write the policies. David tilted his head. So you chose neutrality between justice and injustice? Tom said nothing. By 11 at night, each person who left the room did so, with a face drained of color. Linda Carver was summoned as well. At first, she protested, insisting she had nothing to do with it, that what happened this morning was an exception. But when Marcus placed an internal email in front of her with the subject line, maintain premium image, avoid non-standard appearances, her body slumped back in the chair. The email had been sent from her own account. Linda's voice trembled. I only followed the CEO Whitman's direction. David looked straight at her. That sentence has been repeated 8 times tonight. Outside, the wind screamed harder, like an echo of the anger rising inside the room. By midnight, David held a long list of people who knew, but stayed silent, who gave orders but denied them, who carried them out, but never dared resist. Marcus closed the folder, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. We have enough grounds to act on at least 9 people in leadership positions. Eric added, and if this goes public, it will shake the entire industry. David quietly scanned the list. The names that had been so arrogant that morning now lay in neat lines on paper. He knew that every signature he was about to put down would change hundreds of lives. But he also knew that the truth could not stay locked in a filing cabinet any longer. 2 in the morning. The door opened again. Linda stepped in, even paler than before. Whitman, the CEO, is on the phone for you. He wants to negotiate. David took the call, his voice calm and flat like frozen water. There is nothing to negotiate, Charles. Your entire system has already condemned itself. I am only signing the verdict. Silence on the other end. Then the line disconnected. David turned to Jessica. "Prepare an internal announcement. At 7 in the morning, I want every Horizon Vista employee to wake up to the same message: a new era has begun." When everyone else left the room, David remained. The empty conference room held only the hum of the air conditioner and the reflection of neon light on the polished table. He looked at the list one more time. At the bottom, Jessica had printed a title in bold: Horizon Vista Internal Culture. Purge Phase 1. David picked up a pen and signed his name. Blue ink spread slowly across the paper like blood seeping into fabric. Outside the window, the Chicago sky was beginning to change color. The first streaks of dawn broke through the clouds, casting light over the row of Horizon Vista planes lying still on the tarmac. He spoke softly, almost only to himself. "We will fly again, but this time under a clean sky." And as that first light hit the glass, David Coleman understood that this night had not just been a purge, but the beginning of a rebirth for an entire empire. 7 in the morning. Chicago was waking up after a cold, rainy night. The young sun slipped through layers of grey cloud, reflecting off glass buildings, and even the worn sign of Horizon Vista Airlines in the distance beyond the airport. On the 20th floor of the Marriott O'Hare Hotel, David Coleman stood silently at the window, a cup of coffee gone cold in his hand, his eyes thoughtful as he watched the silver-blue logo on the planes preparing for takeoff. Behind him, the Coleman Equity Group team was in full motion. Keyboards clattered non-stop. Jessica Moore's voice rang out, clear and cool. "The internal announcement has been sent across the entire system. The subject line reads, 'Horizon Vista enters the era of transparency.'" David nodded and set his cup down. Reactions. Chaotic, Jessica answered her eyes, never leaving the screen. Some employees are relieved, many are in shock, a few are angry. But they all know something has changed forever. Right then, the door opened. Marcus Ruiz walked in with Eric Nguyen and Lauren Brooks. All three had been awake all night, but there was no fatigue in their eyes, only focus and urgency. "Mr. Coleman," Marcus said, placing a thick folder on the table, "we have completed the final report. Termination list 9 people. That includes CEO Whitman, 3 regional vice presidents, and the entire customer service oversight team. The decisions are signed, backed by evidence, and cannot be challenged." David opened the folder and skimmed through the dense lines of text. "And the rest," Marcus replied, "they are being kept on temporarily. But they will all undergo re-evaluation within 60 days. If they cannot prove their value and their commitment to a new attitude, they will be let go." David smiled faintly, a tired but deep smile. "Good. But do not forget, our goal is not just to remove, it is to rebuild." He turned to Lauren, his voice softening. "Lauren, I need you here. You understand the culture on the inside better than anyone. I want you to lead the passenger service restructuring team." Lauren froze. "Me, I am just an economy cabin flight attendant." David gave a gentle laugh. "You are the one who told the truth when everyone else stayed silent. In this world, that is the highest rank there is." In that moment, Lauren's eyes filled with tears. She nodded and whispered, "I will not let you down." Eric stepped in. "The media is waiting. Last night, the video of what happened passed over 3 million views. Major outlets are all asking the same thing. How will the new airline owned by a black billionaire respond?" David checked his watch. "We will answer them at 9 in the morning in hangar number 4. The air in the room seemed to tighten. Everyone understood that this would be more than a press conference. This would be a declaration of rebirth. 9 o'clock in the morning, hangar number 4, O'Hare Airport. Outside, the wind roared through the open space, the smell of jet fuel mixing with the chill of early day. In front of hundreds of reporters and their lenses, a podium bearing the Horizon Vista logo stood in the center of the concrete floor, with the massive silver body of a jet towering behind it, the symbol of an entire American industry. David Coleman stepped forward in a black suit and a deep blue tie. The noise died almost at once. Camera flashes exploded like a storm. "Thank you all for coming," his voice carried out steady and clear. Yesterday, a Horizon Vista passenger was downgraded from first class without any legitimate reason. That passenger was me. The hangar fell completely silent. That was not an individual mistake, he continued. It was a symptom of a collective disease, a corporate culture that allows prejudice and fear to decide how human beings are treated. And today that disease is officially diagnosed, and it will be treated. A sharp click from the rows of cameras fired in unison. David raised his hand, signaling Jessica to start the slides. The giant LED screen behind him lit up, showing charts and numbers, 27 lawsuits, hundreds of complaint service ratings down by 48%. This is the truth that the previous leadership hid. They called it protecting the brand image. But I say this, the brand does not need protection. People need respect. He took a deep breath and looked directly at the rows of reporters. I declare that from this moment, Horizon Vista will be reborn from an airline into a symbol of justice. Every policy, every procedure, and every leader will be replaced if they no longer reflect that value. Murmurs spread through the crowd. A reporter from a major financial network raised a hand. "Mr. Coleman, there are rumors that you fired the entire executive board overnight. Is that true?" David didn't hesitate. "Yes. And I would do it again if I had to. No flight can safely take off if the crew does not believe in the direction." Another reporter asked. "Some say this is an act of revenge for a personal insult." David looked straight into the cameras, his voice firm. "If demanding fairness is seen as revenge, then we are living in a very broken world. I am not seeking revenge. I am seeking accountability." Applause rose from the rows of Horizon Vista employees standing along the edge of the hangar. They were no longer bystanders. They were witnesses to a turning point. David lifted his hand and invited Lauren forward. "I want to introduce someone. She is proof that courage can begin in the lowest ranked positions." Lauren stepped out, her heart pounding. She took the microphone, her voice trembling. "I used to think I could not change anything. But last night, I saw the opposite when someone with power chooses not to look away. I believe we can build an airline where everyone is welcomed the same way, not because of status, not because of skin color." The applause swelled again, louder, longer. David returned to the microphone, his tone dropping into something like a vow. "Starting today, Horizon Vista officially launches the Sky Equal initiative. Every employee from pilot to cleaning staff will be retrained not only in skills, but in what it means to respect another human being. Every passenger, no matter their cabin, will hold equal value. And to remind us of that, every single day, I am changing this airline's motto. Excellence is our standard. Respect is our only currency." The applause turned into chants of Coleman. Coleman mingled with choked sobs from long-time staff. On the screen, the Horizon Vista logo faded, replaced by a new name in glowing silver-blue letters, Ever Rise Airlines. David looked up at it, his eyes shining, not from victory, but from belief, the belief that a company can have a soul, and that today that soul had been saved. He bowed his head slightly. "I am not here just to make promises. I am here to prove them. Let us rise together, not only in the sky, but in the way we treat one another." As David stepped down from the podium, Jessica came up beside him. "The media is exploding," she whispered. "The hashtag #FlyWithDignity is spreading across every platform." David smiled, his voice quiet, but certain. "Let them talk." For the first time in history, they are talking about justice, not scandal. Outside, the sun burst through the clouds, pouring light over the hangar, where the Everrise logo had just been fixed to the body of a brand new Boeing. The rays bounced off the glass and into David's eyes, warm, fierce, and proud. In that moment, he understood that this fight was no longer his alone. It was a promise to the millions of people who had been pushed into economy class in life, in work, in society, and now those very people would be the ones rising with him. The bright morning after the press conference had barely settled before the first storm arrived. Just 3 days after Everrise Airlines was announced, social media and news outlets were flooded with divided headlines. Some hailed David Coleman as the hero who revived the airline industry, while others accused him of using power for personal revenge. On his desk in the temporary Chicago headquarters, the morning newspapers lay neatly stacked. Coleman fires 9 executives overnight. Reform or purge. Is Everrise gambling with justice? New CEO accused of corporate coup over personal insult. David read each line without a change in expression, though in his eyes a cold steel glimmer began to form. He understood that every reform brings fear, and fear breeds resistance. Jessica walked in, holding a tablet. Bad news. Whitman just appeared on a conservative network. He claimed he was forced to resign and is now suing Everrise for reverse discrimination. David leaned back in his chair, his voice calm and low. "And how's the public reacting? Those who support you, believe you. Those who don't have one more reason to hate you." The hashtag #BoycottWokeAirlines is spreading fast. From the corner of the room, Marcus Ruiz, the Human Resources Director, added, "We've got trouble inside too. Some old staff are complaining that they're being treated like criminals during the bias awareness training. Many are delaying signing the new ethics agreement. And revenue?" Jessica inhaled deeply. "Bookings are down 11% in the first week." No one said another word. The room thickened with tension. Finally, David smiled faintly, his tone low but firm. "This isn't failure. This is the reaction of bitter medicine. When you touch a diseased system, it fights back. But we don't stop." He stood walking to the window overlooking the runway. The Chicago sky was grey, heavy with wind. Let them call me a destroyer. I'm not destroying. I'm dismantling the walls that have kept thousands of people silent for too long. That afternoon, a message from security arrived. "So you should know there's been a threat sent to the office. A handwritten letter. It says, 'Stop now or be taken down.'" Jessica placed the envelope on his desk. The white paper bore shaky handwriting. No fingerprints, no security footage of the sender. David glanced at it, once then set it aside. "They won't scare me." We move forward. But the threats didn't stop at letters. The next day, Everrise's booking system crashed, locking thousands of customers out of their confirmed flights. The tech department reported that someone had inserted malicious code into the new seat allocation algorithm, the very system David had ordered to prevent passenger bias. Marcus clenched his jaw. "This is internal sabotage. Someone inside doesn't want the Sky Equal program to exist." David stayed calm. "Find them. But don't just assign blame. understand why they did it. Jessica stared at him in disbelief. You still want to understand them after all this? Yes, he said simply. Because if I don't, I'll become the same system I'm trying to dismantle. 3 weeks later, Everrise faced its second storm. A televised speech by Senator Daniel Kirk, once a political ally of Whitman, spread across every major network. We are witnessing a dangerous form of reverse discrimination, Kirk said before the cameras. A black billionaire is using the name of justice to fire white employees for looking different from him. That's not equality. That's revenge. His words poured gasoline on the fire. Conservative outlets amplified it. Crowds gathered outside the Dallas headquarters, holding signs that read, "Keep politics out of airlines and stop reverse racism." The media called it the Everrise Storm. In the emergency meeting room, Jessica sighed. If we don't act, the stock will nosedive. The investment board is demanding an official statement. Eric Nguyen, now the company's chief legal advisor, spoke up. The only way out is total transparency. They're attacking us with fear. We fight back with truth. David nodded. Agreed. Prepare to release every piece of data from Horizon Vista's discrimination history over the past 3 years. No edits. No cover-ups. Marcus frowned. You're really going to make the worst of it public. The shareholders will lose their minds. Yes, David replied, but they'll know we aren't afraid of light, and neither will our customers. 3 days later, Everrise published a historic report, hundreds of pages of statistics, complaints, and previously hidden cases, all released on the company's homepage. At the same time, David posted a public video with only 3 sentences. Justice doesn't hurt business. Hiding the truth does. Everrise isn't perfect, but we are honest. Only those who face their mistakes can truly rise. The video spread like wildfire. Half praised it, half raged against it. But more importantly, trust was returning. A month later, Marcus entered David's office with new numbers. Bookings are up 9%. Other major airlines are considering adopting similar transparency policies. But we still have internal pushback. A group of former staff are spreading rumors that you practice reverse discrimination. David nodded slowly. I can't make them like me, but I can make them choose, move forward, or get left behind. He paused, then looked at Marcus. I want to launch a program called Voices of the Crew. Every employee gets to speak freely, whether they agree or disagree. No one will be punished for honesty. Marcus smiled. That's something they've never had before, the right to speak without fear. That night, David walked alone onto the runway. The city glowed in the distance, but the airport was unusually still. A Boeing jet with the Everrise logo sat quietly under the floodlights. The cold air bit at his skin. He placed a hand on the cool metal of the fuselage, feeling the pulse of the giant body he now guided. From afar, a maintenance worker approached, small against the vast tarmac. He stopped hesitant. Mr. Coleman, I just wanted to say thank you for doing what everyone else was afraid to do. David turned to face the young man. No need to thank me. I'm just doing what's right. But promise me this. If one day you see me wrong, remind me. The worker nodded, his eyes bright in the light. As David walked away, the wind swept through his hair, carrying the faint hum of engines starting up in the distance. The sound grew louder, like the heartbeat of Everrise returning after the storm. He closed his eyes, drew in the cold air, and murmured to himself, Justice isn't a destination. It's a flight with no landing strip. In the dim night, the silver plane reflected the moonlight, a reminder that even when attacked, even when distorted, The truth still flies steady and untouchable above every cloud of prejudice. On a grey October morning, Chicago once again welcomed the first cold winds of the season. In the glass-walled office on the top floor of Airline's temporary headquarters, David Coleman quietly looked out over the city. Below, the small streets were slick with rain, and the cars moved like streams of cold metal. On his desk, the latest revenue report glowed on the screen, third quarter revenue down 18%. Hashtag boycott Everrise still among the top trending topics. This was the kind of moment that would have any other CEO afraid. But for David, fear had never been the problem, because he had spent his whole life living inside it. The office door swung open, and Jessica Moore walked in, her expression tight. "We need to talk. The shareholders are losing patience. A group is pushing to call a special session to consider replacing you with an interim director." David turned from the window. Calm, I figured. "Who is leading it, Robert Hayes?" she replied. "He says you are turning an airline into a moral battlefield." David let out a soft laugh, not bitter, but quietly sad. When people have to choose between profit and conscience, they always pick the easier one. I do not. A moment later, Marcus Ruiz and Lauren Brooks came in as well. They had just finished a field review of the branches, and their faces said everything exhausted, yet resolute. "We just got back from Dallas," Marcus said, his voice rough. "You need to hear this. A group of old employees is rallying others. They are saying Everrise is turning the workplace into politics. Some of them are publicly burning their old uniforms and live streaming that they felt insulted for having to attend bias training." Lauren added, "Some of the new people are being quietly bullied. They are being called the ethics squad. I have tried to protect them, but the pressure is intense." The room sank into silence. The wind howled against the glass, sounding like the building itself was sighing. David folded his arms, his gaze drifting far beyond the walls. "Change has never been gentle," he said. "It always frightens the weak and angers the powerful. But we cannot stop." Jessica looked up. "So what are you going to do if we do not reassure the market?" "Everrise will be out of cash in 3 months." David walked slowly to the large glass board and picked up a marker. He wrote 3 words. "Truth, trust, transparency. We are not going to hide. We are going to lay everything out, the bad and the good. I want another press conference, but this time not in a hotel or an office, at Hangar 1 where it all began." Marcus stared at him. "You are going to face the media alone." "They are hunting you right now." "Exactly," David answered. "If I am afraid of them, then I am no different from the people I just fired." 2 days later at 9 in the morning, Hangar 1 was packed. Hundreds of reporters, shareholders, and employees had gathered. The murmur of voices rolled through the air like waves. David stepped up to the podium. There was no microphone, no giant screen, only him standing beneath the light pouring in from the open hangar doors, with the Everrise logo on the plane behind him. He spoke his voice low, but carrying clearly. "I know there are people who think I destroyed Horizon Vista, that I am devaluing the people who once served this place. But the truth is, Horizon Vista destroyed itself long ago when it allowed prejudice to fly on its planes." The crowd fell silent. Recorders clicked on across the room. "Yes, we are losing money. Yes, the stock is dropping. But that is the price of buying back trust. We do not sell tickets to earn money by staying silent. We fly to prove that respect still has value in this world." An older shareholder stood up, voice booming. Respect cannot keep a company alive. David turned his eyes to him. You are wrong. A lack of respect is exactly what killed this company before I arrived. And I would rather go bankrupt with dignity than grow rich on prejudice. A few hands began to clap, scattered at first, then spreading like sparks through dry forest. Standing among the crowd, Lauren felt her eyes sting. She knew this moment would be remembered, not because of numbers, but because of courage. David raised the latest report. In the next 6 months, Everrise will publish all of our internal data salaries hiring complaints. Everyone will see the truth, no matter how ugly it is. When that happens, anyone who wants to leave, I will not stop them. But those who stay, we will rewrite what it means to be a good company together. At the back of the hangar, a young technician, the same one who had met David on the stormy night, clenched his fist and whispered, "Yes." That evening, with the city lit up outside, David sat alone in his office. The window was cracked open, letting in the autumn wind, carrying the smell of rain and the distant hum of engines. On his desk were emails from thousands of employees, messages of support, messages of anger, and messages of apology. Jessica walked in and set a cup of coffee down. "You know," she said, "bookings are up 5% in just 24 hours. Your speech is going viral as an inspirational clip." David smiled faintly. The public forgets quickly. Today they cheer, tomorrow they might throw stones. What matters is that we do not change our destination out of fear. Marcus appeared on a video call from Dallas. We found who inserted the malicious code. A group of old engineers tied to Whitman. They are now cooperating with investigators. David replied simply, "Good, but handle it by the book. Do not turn them into scapegoats." Lauren appeared at the door, holding a folder. "We have hired 320 new employees, most of them people other airlines rejected because of bias. They say they want to work somewhere that listens." David took the folder, his gaze softening. Then Everrise is flying in the right direction. Late into the night, the city outside slept, and only the green glow from the control panel lights filled the room. David sat in quiet thought, looking at the photo of his father on the wall, the man with the calloused hands and gentle smile. He spoke softly. "You see, Dad, I am doing what you taught me. Not just to win a seat for myself, but to make a place where the whole world can sit together." In that moment, his phone lit up with a notification from CNN. Everrise Airlines becomes the first carrier in history to publicly disclose all discrimination data. The article ended with a single line, "A risky move, but it may be the most important ethical turning point in the modern airline industry." David set the phone down and leaned back in his chair, eyes closing for a brief moment. The sound of rain outside blended with the rumble of planes starting up. He knew the sky was still full of storms, but he also knew that every storm eventually passes if the pilot keeps his hands steady on the controls. In the pale glow of the screen beside him, one line shone on his new strategic plan. Everrise, where every flight begins with respect. David smiled to himself, a small smile carrying the strength of someone who knows he has chosen the right path, the path that flies against the wind of the storm in order to reach the place where true light begins. 6 months later, Everrise Airlines was no longer a name surrounded by controversy, but had become a symbol of rebirth. The company's stock had risen, 22% revenue had recovered, and more importantly, trust had returned. Passengers who once boycotted the airline were now proudly showing their tickets, printed with the words, "Fly with dignity." During the annual review meeting, David Coleman looked around the room filled with new faces, white, black, Asian, and Latin. They were all smiling, working together, united in purpose. He spoke softly, his voice mingling with the sunlight streaming through the glass window. We have proven that respect does not make us weaker. It helps us fly higher. When the meeting ended, Lauren stayed behind and smiled warmly. "Mr. Coleman, now I believe it. The sky really can change." David replied, his gaze fixed on the runway, where a Boeing jet bearing the Everrise logo was lifting into the air. It's not the sky that changed Lauren. It's us. We've learned how to fly in the right direction. The sound of the engines echoed like a promise that justice, once it takes flight, will never descend again. 1 year after the historic reform, Everrise Airlines had become a model studied in business schools. Across the blue sky, hundreds of flights bearing the silver-winged logo-connected continents, a symbol of resurrection. In the first-class cabin of the Chicago to New York flight, David Coleman sat in seat 2A. In front of him, a young black entrepreneur fumbled nervously with his economy ticket. David smiled and called the flight attendant. "Upgrade him to this cabin. We should save a seat for the one who will write the next chapter of justice." The plane soared through the clouds. Lauren, now the global director of service, passed by and whispered softly, "You did it, David." He looked out the window where the golden sunset reflected on the body of the plane, carrying the words, "Excellence is our standard. Respect is our only currency." David spoke quietly, as if reminding himself, when people learn to respect one another, every flight becomes a journey upward. Outside the sun was setting, but his legacy and Everrise's continued to fly on in the light, from the perspective of an expert in ethical leadership. David Coleman's journey was not just a story about a business deal, but a testament that justice is not an abstract concept. It is a choice, the courage to do what is right even when it comes at a cost. Everrise proved that when a company puts people before profit, profit will always find its way back. And perhaps the greatest legacy David left behind was not a reborn airline, but the belief that dignity can soar as high as any aircraft in the sky. If you believe that respect is the strongest engine that can help this world take flight, hit like to share that message and subscribe so you never miss the stories where ethics and power collide. Leave a comment below with one simple phrase. Keep respect